The moment Brad Hoffman said, "This entire project would take half the time if my son managed it," the conference room went dead silent. I could hear the air conditioning humming and my own heartbeat. I was sitting at the far end of the table, the only guy on the engineering side who'd actually built anything with his hands in the last 20 years, and every head in that room slowly turned toward me. My name's Ryan Mitchell, I'm 47, and I've been busting my ass in construction and engineering for 24 years. Started as a field engineer right out of college, worked my way up to senior engineering manager at Gulf Coast Engineering Systems here in Houston. I know every piece of equipment we run, every safety protocol we follow, and every trick these young hotshots think they invented. Brad folded his hands and stared right at me. Justin understands the pace our clients demand, he continued. Ryan's approach is thorough. The way he said that last word made it sound like a disease. Justin Hoffman sat 3 seats down, looking like he'd stepped out of a business magazine. Fresh MBA, press shirt, and that cocky smile you only see on guys who've never had to explain to a worker's family why their dad got hurt on the job. When our eyes met, he raised an eyebrow like he was already measuring my office for new furniture. I had my resignation letter in my jacket pocket before I walked into that meeting. Not because I wanted to quit, but because I could see where this was heading. Brad had been setting me up for weeks, and his little speech just confirmed it. I stood up slowly. "If you want your son to handle it," I said, keeping my voice steady, "then this belongs to you." I pulled out the letter and set it on the table. Justin's smile got wider. Smug little punk. Then Shane Williams, our CEO, finally spoke up. "Fine," he said, voice flat as a board. "Give the project to his son." Brad looked like he'd just won the lottery. Justin straightened up in his chair like he was accepting a crown. Shane turned his eyes to me. "Ryan, meet me in 10 minutes. Bring that resignation letter." I walked out of that boardroom knowing whatever happened next was going to change more than just my job. When I first moved to Houston 15 years ago, I never thought I'd end up in corporate boardrooms where some executive's kid could decide whether my 24 years of experience was worth a damn. I came here with my tools, my pickup truck, and the simple idea that if you worked hard and did things right, you'd be okay. Gulf Coast Engineering Systems was supposed to be part of building that stability. Back then, I was coming off 9 years working smaller projects across Texas and Louisiana, learning the business from the ground up. Houston meant bigger contracts, better money, and the chance to work on infrastructure that actually mattered. For the first decade at Gulf Coast, Brad Hoffman barely knew I existed. He was some VP who showed up to job sites in clean boots and left before the real work started. Back then, his ignorance was easier to deal with than what came later. "Ryan, you always know which fire to put out first," my old boss Jordan Price used to tell me. During Hurricane Harvey in 2017, when half our equipment was underwater and we had emergency repairs to finish before the refineries could restart, I worked 18-hour days keeping 3 critical projects alive. The chemical plants needed their systems back online, and any delay meant millions in losses for our clients. I remember standing waist-deep in floodwater, directing a crane operator through radio static while Justin would have been safe in some air-conditioned office, probably wondering why we couldn't just email a solution. Jordan called me his anchor during that mess. Brad called it luck. That should have told me everything I needed to know about how different we saw the world. The real problem started about 8 months ago. Brad had been promoted to Vice President of Operations, which meant he suddenly had opinions about how engineering should work. Before that, he'd been content to let us handle the technical side while he managed budgets and client relationships. But something changed. Maybe it was pressure from above, maybe it was his own insecurity, but he started looking at our department like we were the problem instead of the solution. Justin showed up about 6 months ago. Brad introduced him at a staff meeting like he was unveiling the future of engineering. "Fresh perspective," he said, looking straight at me like 24 years of experience was some kind of burden we needed to shed. Justin shook my hand with that practiced grip they teach in business school. "I've heard your project management is solid," he said. The pause before that last word told me exactly what he thought of solid. I should have seen it coming then. Should have recognized the setup. But I'd been at Gulf Coast long enough to think I was safe. I had relationships with clients, respect from the field crews, and a track record that spoke for itself. I figured that would be enough. I was wrong. The changes started small. A safety meeting I normally ran suddenly didn't need the engineering manager involved. A equipment maintenance report I wrote came back with entire sections changed, removing my recommendations and adding Justin's name as the reviewer. Data I'd verified from field inspections got altered before it reached the board, making Justin's timeline estimates look realistic and my safety concerns look paranoid. When I mentioned it to Casey Reed, my best field supervisor, he lowered his voice. "We see it, Ryan. We just can't push back. You know how Brad operates around here." I knew. Casey had been with the company for 12 years, worked his way up from equipment operator to site supervisor. He'd seen enough politics to know when to keep his head down. But the look in his eyes told me this was different. This wasn't just corporate reshuffling, this was targeted. And I could feel the ground shifting under my feet long before Brad decided that getting rid of me was worth risking the whole company. Justin Hoffman walked into Gulf Coast Engineering like the job sites had been built just for him. He had that polished confidence that comes from never having to explain why a shortcut led to someone getting hurt, an expensive degree, and a last name that opened doors faster than any resume. His handshake was firm and empty. Looking forward to learning the ropes, he told me his first week. The way he said it made it clear he figured the ropes were optional. The shift started quiet. A project timeline I'd submitted came back with Justin's notes scribbled all over it. "Just updating the approach," he said, even though his changes ignored equipment limitations I'd learned from 15 years of field work. Take the pipeline integrity project we were running for Chevron. I'd built in extra time for pressure testing because I knew from experience that their older systems needed careful handling. Justin's revisions cut that time in half. When I asked him about it, he just smiled and said, "We can't let perfect be the enemy of good, right?" Perfect. Like making sure pipes don't explode under pressure was some kind of luxury we couldn't afford. In our next team meeting, I presented the updated safety protocols for the new refinery expansion. These weren't suggestions. They were requirements from our insurance carrier after we'd had that crane incident back in 2019. Justin jumped in before I finished. "Actually, I walked the crew through this on Monday," he announced. The room went quiet, eyes flicking between us. Casey opened his mouth to correct him, but I shook my head. No point embarrassing the kid in front of everybody. Not yet. But Casey caught me after the meeting. "Ryan? He never talks to any crew. Half the guys don't even know his name." That's when I started paying closer attention. A few days later, one of my safety analysts, Melissa Gray, caught me by the equipment yard. She looked nervous, kept checking over her shoulder like she was afraid someone might see us talking. "Justin pulled us aside yesterday," she whispered. "He said the company needs to move faster. Said your methods were solid but old school." She paused. "He asked us to streamline some of the testing procedures." I felt that familiar knot in my stomach, but I kept my voice calm. "What kind of streamlining?" "Reducing inspection intervals, cutting some of the redundant safety checks." She looked uncomfortable. "He said you'd approve it once you saw how much time it saved. I never approved any of it." But somehow, reports started going out with my signature on revised protocols I'd never seen. The more Justin pushed, the more Brad praised him. "He sees where the industry's heading," Brad said in a meeting, tapping Justin's shoulder. "We can't keep doing things the way we did in the 1990s. Board members started repeating Brad's exact phrases. Modernization, new energy, eliminating inefficiencies. Their eyes drifted toward me every time, like I was some dinosaur who couldn't adapt. What really got to me was watching the field crew's reactions. These guys had worked with me for years. They knew I'd climb into a confined space alongside them, that I'd shut down a job if something didn't look right, that I'd fight for proper equipment when budgets got tight. But now they were getting mixed messages. Justin would show up at job sites with his clean hard hat and safety vest that still had the tags on it, telling experienced operators they were doing things wrong. Then I'd get calls from foremen asking whose instructions they should follow. "Boss," one of them said to me over the radio during a heavy lift operation, "the new guy says we don't need the taglines on this crane pick, says it's slowing us down." Taglines. Basic rigging safety that prevents loads from spinning and hitting people. I'd seen a man get killed when a pipe section swung loose because some hotshot thought taglines were unnecessary. "Use the taglines," I told him, "always." But when I checked the daily reports later, Justin had written up the operation as an example of improved efficiency, claiming he'd optimized the rigging procedure. I started documenting everything. Emails, timestamps, equipment logs, safety reports. Every time Justin claimed credit for something he hadn't done, every time my recommendations got altered, every instance where safety protocols got watered down in the name of efficiency. I didn't know what I'd need eventually, but I knew the ground was shifting faster than I could keep up with. Brad wasn't treating me like a valued engineer anymore. He was treating me like an obstacle, and I needed to understand why he felt threatened enough to rewrite 24 years of experience. The real wake-up call came during the monthly safety review. I'd prepared a presentation on near-miss incidents from the previous quarter. Nothing dramatic, just the kind of data we track to prevent bigger problems. Small stuff. A scaffold that wasn't properly secured, a crane operator who got distracted, a gas detector that malfunctioned. But when Brad pulled up the report on the screen, my data had been changed. The numbers were lower, the incidents were downplayed, and several problems I'd flagged as requiring immediate attention were marked as resolved through improved procedures. As you can see, Brad said, pointing at the slide, our safety performance has improved significantly since we modernized our protocols. Diana Walsh, one of the board members, nodded approvingly. What's driving the improvement? Justin leaned forward with that modest smile he'd perfected. We've been streamlining some of the redundant processes. The crews are responding well to clearer, more efficient procedures. I kept my mouth shut, but inside I was doing the math. If the board thought our safety numbers were improving while we were actually cutting corners, someone was going to get hurt. And when they did, all that manipulated data would point straight back to me as the senior engineer who'd supposedly approved the changes. After the meeting, I pulled Brad aside in the hallway. Those incident numbers were wrong, I told him. He looked at me with that patient expression people use when they think you're not keeping up. They were optimized, Ryan. We can't present raw data to the board. We need to show trends, improvements. We need to show the truth. The truth, he said, is that this company needs to modernize. And if you can't see that, maybe it's time to consider whether you're the right fit for where we're going. That night, I went home and printed out my resignation letter. Not because I was ready to quit, but because I could see exactly where this was heading. And I wanted to be ready when it got there. Brad's first performance review landed in my inbox on a Thursday morning. The subject line looked normal, but the content was anything but. My name showed up once, buried in a bullet point at the bottom. Engineering support provided as needed. I stared at it for a long time before forwarding it to Casey. He responded immediately. Where's the safety compliance metrics? The equipment maintenance overhaul? The emergency response coordination you handled during Harvey? I typed back, ask Brad. But Casey wouldn't. None of them would. That's how corporate politics works. You can see the game being played, but calling it out just makes you a target. At the next leadership meeting, Brad put his report up on the screen. As you can see, he said, pointing at the slide, project delays stem from outdated protocols. Ryan's methods worked years ago, but client demands require a different approach now. I kept my eyes on the table. Outdated protocols meant everything I'd built to keep people safe and projects profitable. 24 years of learning what worked, what didn't, and what got people killed. Justin leaned forward with fake modesty. I've been testing a new workflow. With proper support, we can cut weeks off delivery. Diana Walsh nodded. Speed is everything in this market. I had to speak up. Speed without safety compliance puts us at risk. Several steps Justin removed are required by our insurance and union agreements. The room got quiet. You don't question the golden boy in front of the board unless you're ready for consequences. Brad's smile got tight. Agreements can be renegotiated. They can, I said, but not without notifying the unions and updating our liability coverage. We're talking about confined space procedures, electrical lockout protocols. This isn't paperwork, it's what keeps people alive. For a second, nobody breathed. Then another board member jumped in, echoing Brad's words exactly. We need innovation, not resistance. There it was. You don't hear the same phrases that often unless somebody's been planting them. The board wasn't just hearing Brad's version of events. They were repeating it back like a script. Through it all, Shane Williams sat at the head of the table, hands folded, expression unreadable. He didn't agree or disagree, he just watched. And somehow, that was the most unsettling part of the whole meeting. After that, things accelerated. Reports I'd written started appearing with Justin's name on them. Budget allocations I'd never authorized showed up in project files. My archived safety assessments were being used to justify decisions I'd never made. The breaking point came during a site inspection at the new chemical processing facility. We were installing critical safety systems, emergency shutdown valves that could prevent a catastrophic release if something went wrong. I'd specified particular manufacturers, specific testing procedures, redundant backup systems. But when I got to the job site, none of that was there. The valves were cheaper knockoffs. The testing had been abbreviated. The backup systems had been eliminated entirely. "What the hell is this?" I asked the site foreman. He looked uncomfortable. Orders came down from the front office. New specifications. Whose specifications? Kid named Hoffman. Said you'd approve the changes. I pulled out my phone and called Justin directly. "We need to talk. Now." 20 minutes later, he showed up in his company truck, still looking like he'd stepped out of a catalog. Clean boots, pressed shirt, safety vest that had never seen real work. "Problem?" he asked, like he couldn't imagine what I might be upset about. "These valves," I pointed at the equipment. "They're not rated for the pressures we're dealing with. And where are the backup sensors?" "Cost optimization," he said. "The client was looking for savings. I found them. You found a way to kill people." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Come on, Ryan. You're being dramatic. These systems have redundancy built in." "No, they don't. That's why we install backup systems. Because when the primary fails, and it will fail, people die." "Look," he said, putting on that patient tone I was getting tired of hearing. "I understand you're used to gold-plating everything, but clients don't want to pay for your paranoia anymore." Paranoia. 24 years of experience, and he called it paranoia. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a bottle of beer and my laptop, going through every email, every report, every document I'd saved over the past 8 months. The pattern was clear. Justin was systematically taking credit for my work while implementing changes that increased risk and cut costs. But it was worse than I'd thought. He wasn't just stealing credit. He was setting me up to take the blame when something went wrong. Every shortcut, every eliminated safety measure, every corner that got cut had my name associated with it somehow. If that chemical plant blew up, if someone got hurt because of those cheap valves, all the documentation would point back to me as the senior engineer who'd supposedly approved the changes. I called Casey. "We need to meet." Not at work. We met at a diner near the ship channel, far from corporate ears. Casey brought along 2 other supervisors, guys who'd been with the company long enough to know how things really worked. "It's bad, Ryan," Casey said. "Worse than you know. The crews are starting to refuse some of the new procedures. They're scared. Scared of what? Getting hurt. Getting blamed when something goes wrong." He leaned forward. "Tommy Rodriguez walked off the job yesterday. 20-year veteran. Said he wasn't going to get someone killed because some college boy wanted to save money." That hit me hard. Tommy was solid, the kind of guy who'd work in a hurricane if you needed him to. If he was walking away, it meant things were bad enough that experienced people were choosing unemployment over the risk. "There's more," Casey continued. "Word is that Brad's been talking to some board members privately. Something about restructuring the engineering department, bringing in fresh leadership, code for getting rid of anyone who might object to Justin's methods." I made a decision that night. If Brad and Justin wanted to play corporate politics, I'd give them exactly what they were asking for, but not the way they expected. The next morning, I walked into that boardroom with my resignation letter in my pocket and a clear understanding of what was about to happen. Brad's little speech about Justin being faster than me was just the opening I'd been waiting for, because sometimes the best way to win is to let your opponents think they're getting exactly what they want. Shane Williams's office door was already open when I got there, resignation letter still warm from my jacket pocket. He didn't gesture to a chair, just looked at me with that expression you can't read. "Close the door, Ryan." I did. My hands were a little damp from gripping the letter so tight. He nodded toward it. "You brought that this morning?" "Yes." "Why?" His voice was even, not accusing, almost curious. I met his eyes. Brad's been clearing the path for Justin for months. Today wasn't spontaneous. And if I stayed quiet any longer, I'd become the excuse they needed to tear apart everything we've built here. Shane studied me for a long moment. "What do you think Justin can't handle?" I didn't sugarcoat it. The equipment interfaces, the safety protocols, the union agreements I negotiated after that crane accident in 2019. There are procedures that only make sense because of how we built them around real field conditions. Remove the wrong one and people get hurt, or we lose contracts. He exhaled slowly. I suspected as much. Suspected what? My pulse jumped. "That Brad's been cooking the progress reports," he said, covering up Justin's mistakes, showing selective data. "The numbers haven't added up for weeks, but I needed confirmation." I held my breath. "And now I have it," he said, eyes sharpening. "Thanks to you." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he opened his desk drawer and slid a business card toward me. Apex Infrastructure Analytics. They're one of our most important partners. I frowned. You want me to work for them? I want you where Brad can't manipulate you or the outcome, he said. If you resign, I'll accept it, but your work is too important to get buried under his politics. The card felt heavier than it should have. Shane's move wasn't about getting rid of me. It was about positioning me somewhere Brad couldn't reach, and I was starting to understand why he wanted me outside the company before the consequences hit. Apex Infrastructure Analytics welcomed me with professional handshakes and a stack of project files thicker than a phone book. My short-term contract was described as an operational review, but the way their director, Ashley Moore, looked at me told a different story. We appreciate you stepping in, Ashley said, handing me the first binder. Gulf Coast's reports haven't matched our field data for months. Shane said you're the only person who can explain the gaps. The phrase hit me like a punch. Only person. I sat at a desk near Ashley's office and opened the top file. The first page showed a timeline I recognized, my original safety protocol from the pipeline project. But the next few pages were wrong. Steps removed, milestones changed, numbers smoothed into patterns that looked too clean to be real. I flagged one section and called Ashley over. Where did this come from? Brad sent it, she said. He said the engineering team approved the modifications. I kept my voice steady. I never approved any of this. She frowned. Then why does his report claim you streamlined these procedures? Because Brad needed Justin to look like a genius. But I didn't say that yet. 2 hours later, Ashley came back with another file. Ryan, look at these equipment logs. They don't match your original maintenance schedules. She was right. They didn't. The logs marked as Justin's efficiency improvements were identical to preliminary drafts I'd written months earlier, drafts I never finalized or released because the testing wasn't complete. I called Casey back at Gulf Coast. Did Brad access my archived files? He hesitated. Ryan, he requested system overrides 3 weeks ago. Said it was for a compliance audit. I didn't think I should refuse, but it didn't feel right. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Apex's documents weren't revealing a misunderstanding. They were revealing a systematic fraud. Brad hadn't just altered reports. He'd stolen my work, piece by piece, and rebuilt it with Justin's name on it. By the third day at Apex, the evidence was overwhelming. Every file I opened pointed back to the same architect, Brad Hoffman. I spread 3 reports across the table. Ashley leaned over my shoulder as I traced a line with my finger. This projection, I said, is built on Justin's supposedly improved equipment utilization rates. Ashley moved closer. But this maintenance log shows the original breakdown patterns. Shows my breakdown patterns, I corrected. This was my preliminary assessment. Justin copied it and changed the timestamps to make it look like his innovation. She sucked in a breath. How many files? Enough to make incompetence look like breakthrough thinking. The next folder was the smoking gun. It contained budget reallocations I'd never authorized. Tens of thousands shifted into Justin's pilot programs with my electronic signature forged on the approval forms. I flipped to the authorization page. Here. He wrote that the cost savings came from my department streamlining operations. That's impossible. I never signed off on any budget transfers. Ashley's voice dropped. Ryan, this is systematic fraud. I nodded. He inflated Justin's performance numbers and buried every mistake under my name. And Brad signed off on all of it. Ashley stepped out and returned with Carl Stone, their compliance officer. Your findings triggered our automatic audit protocols, Carl said, scanning the documents I'd flagged. These discrepancies aren't accounting errors. This is deliberate data manipulation for financial gain. I handed him the complete folder. These are the discrepancies. Use them however your protocols require. He flipped through the pages and let out a low whistle. This isn't creative management. This is criminal fraud. We're legally required to report this. Send it to Shane Williams, I said, and copy the board. They need to see it exactly as it is. Carl nodded grimly. We'll have it delivered within the hour. By late afternoon, Apex's formal audit package was on its way to Gulf Coast Engineering, complete with forensic analysis, federal compliance violations, and proof that every altered file came from Brad's authorization codes. The house of cards he'd built, meeting by meeting, report by report, was about to collapse. And this time, there would be consequences that went far beyond just losing a job. The emergency board meeting happened less than 18 hours after Apex sent their audit. I wasn't invited, but Casey called me the minute he walked out. "Ryan, it was nuclear," he whispered. I could hear voices behind him, angry and desperate. Then Shane's voice cut through, steady and cold. "Brad, explain the financial discrepancies." There was shuffling, stammering, then Brad's shaky response. "Those documents were taken out of context." Shane didn't let up. "Apex's forensic analysis traced the files to your personal authorization codes. Not context. Criminal fraud. The rest happened fast. Justin tried to defend his father, the board voted for immediate termination, and within 24 hours both Hoffmans were escorted out of the building by security. 3 days later, Shane offered me a partnership deal that would make me independently wealthy while keeping Gulf Coast's operations running safely. I didn't sign it right away. That night, I sat in my truck outside the job site where it all started. That chemical processing facility with the cheap valves. The place was lit up like Christmas, night shift working to install proper equipment. Real equipment that would keep people safe. Casey called while I was sitting there. "Ryan, you hear about the partnership offer?" "Yeah. You taking it?" I watched a crew installing the backup safety systems I'd originally specified, systems that would save lives if something went wrong. "What do you think?" "I think," Casey said slowly, "that some of us have been waiting 20 years to work for someone who gives a damn about doing things right." The next morning I went back to Shane's office, not to negotiate the contract, but to add one condition. Any safety recommendation I made would be implemented, period. No cost cutting, no shortcuts, no compromises. Shane smiled for the first time since I'd known him. "That's exactly why I need you as a partner, not an employee." I signed it that afternoon. 3 weeks later, I was back at that same chemical facility, this time as lead consultant. The crew chief, a guy named Rodriguez who'd walked off during the Justin fiasco, met me at the gate. "Heard you're running the show now," he said. "We're running the show," I corrected, "just like it should be." He grinned. "About damn time." As I walked through that plant, checking systems that would actually work when they needed to, I realized something. This wasn't just about beating Brad and Justin. It wasn't even about getting the recognition I deserved. It was about building something that would last, something real. You spend 24 years learning your trade, and somewhere along the way, you forget that the work itself is the reward. Not the politics, not the meetings, not the corporate games. The work, making sure pipes don't explode, making sure people go home safe, building infrastructure that keeps America running. Brad and Justin never understood that. They thought engineering was about spreadsheets and presentations. They thought you could fake expertise with the right buzzwords and a confident smile. But when that emergency shutdown valve opens to prevent a catastrophic release, it doesn't care about your MBA. It only cares whether someone who knew what they were doing installed it properly. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's being so good at what you do that when they try to destroy you, they destroy themselves instead. And walking away with everything you ever wanted, that's just a bonus. In the end, integrity doesn't just protect you from their games. It makes you immune to needing their approval. The best part about building something real is that when they try to tear it down, they discover they never understood what made it valuable in the first place.